Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I am your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. If you are new to the show, welcome to the show. Very happy to have you here. This is going to be an okay one to start off with, depending on whether or not you've beaten the game of Avowed, because there will be spoilers in today's episode, but not till the latter half. So if you want to listen to today's episode but avoid spoilers, you can listen to the first half, and then I will give a musical interlude to signify when I'm entering into spoiler territory. But today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the soul that is in Eora, specifically about a specific soul malady called, it's the soul twins or the twinning of souls. I'll talk about it a little bit more. And then I'm going to also dive into my final impressions for Avowed, because as of this recording, which is, again, still in early March, I have beaten the game and I've already started up another character, actually two characters that I'm running in parallel, and I'm running into some of that early game stuff that I kind of forgot about, and there is a certain side quest that I think is really interesting that reminded me of stuff that have to do with souls and soul maladies, and it also ties into a quest that we have from the Pillars of Eternity games, and so I thought this would be a really good short episode to do, and then lead into a discussion about the actual game itself and how I felt the experience was of the game after beating it. So that's kind of what we're going for today. So yeah, happy to have you here. If you're new, this is a good place to start. If you are wanting to have more lore about the foundations of this world, I recommend checking out episode 0, as it signposts you to other episodes that really talk about the foundational lore, as well as a lot of other topics that are really good for Avowed-related kind of material, like if you want to learn about the Nation of Adir, or Woodica, or the Godlikes, etc., etc. No news to go over as of this particular recording. Avowed has been very successful in its numbers. We've learned that there is a very super secret hidden ending that no one has found yet. But otherwise, people are just enjoying the games. It's seeing a lot of success. We're waiting for any other news or revelations about Avowed, secrets people are finding, whether or not a DLC is going to get greenlit. So at the time of this recording, there's nothing for me to talk about. Yeah, so we're just going to dive straight into today's lore and then the gameplay discussion after that.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So we're going to be discussing soul twins today, possibly touching on some other soul maladies that do exist within the world of Eora, but in order to talk about this, we need to first touch on the topic of the soul. So in the world of Eora, everyone has a soul. Everyone absolutely has a soul. You have a soul, I have a soul, your dog has a soul, etc., etc. And souls are made up of essence. That's the stuff, essentially, the souls are made up of. And essence is more than just in the soul of your person. You can see them you can find essence in pretty much any living substance, and you can actually even find it in the ambient environment around you, technically speaking. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the soul, you can listen to episode number 10, where I talk about the cycle of reincarnation called the Wheel. And if you're interested in actually hearing about the science of the soul, which studies the stuff that souls are made of, which is essence, you can check out episode 17 on animancy. But for today's episode, we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about soul maladies. So souls are things that you have, and the soul is usually, I remember reading the lore, it's the seat of personality, consciousness, and memory. Now, obviously, you store memories within your brain in some way, shape, or form, but like your personality and the morality you have and your consciousness, your awareness of yourself, of the world around you, emanates from your soul in a lot of sense. There is that kind of like mechanic to it. One of the characters in the game of Pillars of Eternity, Aloth Corficer, describes the soul as the self, which is a little more than an amalgamation of memory and feeling that informs the disposition of the soul. It doesn't alone define it. So self is part of the soul, but it doesn't define it entirely. There's an interesting interplay between the soul and the body and what makes a unique person, which I touch on in other episodes. Because the soul is an actual concrete object, granted, it's ethereal, It's incorporeal, but it's not an abstraction. It is a very real thing within this world. It's something that can be interacted with for the purposes of science even. And just like how the physical body can have maladies, that also means in this world, the soul can have maladies. And there are soul maladies that do exist. And in fact, the entire game of Avowed, the pretense to why your character, the envoy, is even going to the Living Lands is to investigate a soul malady, which is the Dream Scourge. That is an example of a soul malady. And there are a number of soul maladies that have existed within the history of the World of Eora that we see in Pillars of Eternity, and we even touch on through the game of Avowed. In Pillars of Eternity 1, there was something called the hollowborn crisis, which focused on people who were born with a body. Obviously, you can't be born without a body, but you can be born without a soul in this world. And so if you are a child born without a soul, you are essentially just an empty vessel. You're like an idling car kind of a thing, right? You're a body that breathes and looks and can probably even eat to some regard, but there's no person in there, if that makes sense. You can have soul fragmenting, right? Like you can have a fragmented soul. And this is the idea that like your soul has been damaged in some way, shape, or form, or there are large pieces or portions of your soul that is missing. And so you don't have a entirely whole soul, or you might even have a weak soul. And this can cause you to have memory lapses. It can have you fits of madness. It could lead to personality disorders. And these things can happen from external forces, especially spiritually based ones. Soul fragmentation is actually kind of a normal thing that happens in this world. As I've mentioned, there is a cycle of reincarnation that exists within this world. And as a soul goes through the cycle of reincarnation, there is a level of erosion that happens on the essence that souls are made of. So a soul can kind of lose some of its essence as it goes through the cycle of reincarnation. However, it can also gain some essence back, kind of making almost a new soul. Not if you think of the soul as like this one little spiritual orb that is all of your person in it, that's not exactly what a soul is in this world. It's just all of the collective essence that makes up this a little bit of uniqueness about you, right? And so there can be fragmenting and erosion of the soul, and there can also be joining of little pieces of soul when it goes through the cycle of reincarnation over and over again, but not generally to the degree that it causes major changes between person to person. But sometimes it can, and that's one of the soul maladies. And that's referred to often as entropy. It's heavily related to the deity of Remergon, who is the god of entropy and cold and finality of death, etc., etc., which I have an episode about. You can listen to that if you want. You can also have an awakened soul, which is to say that you as a person become aware of your past lives, or at least the past lives that the essence in your soul has lived in, which can be particularly interesting if there is multiple past lives, not just in the sense that there is one or two or three, but that maybe your soul has had new essence strapped onto it that is from other past lives, and so you're getting little fragments of that one. And who knows how deep some of these past lives can go. I'm not talking just one or two, like, this generation upon generation upon generation of past lives. And so you can become awakened to that. You can start to experience the memories as if they were your own from your soul. You can even maybe even confuse reality with a past life. And it can lead, as you can imagine, to some level of insanity. I often use the Pillars of Eternity fandom website to get a lot of lore just because it's really laid out in a very well done fashion. And I have to give credit to the people who are on these Wikipedias doing that. I have tried to contribute to it before, but I haven't really figured out the coding of wikis and things like that. And I always mean to, and I haven't done it yet. So if you're out there listening to this and you have contributed to the wiki and helped organize this information, thank you so much for that. And the reason I say that is because there is one other thing. If you are on the Pillars of Eternity fandom article for the soul, I'm reading these maladies off of a section here. There is one here. It's not technically a malady because it's not something that you have inherent, it's not damaging to your soul in the sense of, it's natural. But there is this thing called a bioic, which is essentially a soul storm, right? So in the real world, you could have physical winds, you could have a hurricane, you could have a storm. And there are some events called bioics, at least in the first Pillars of Eternity game, where there's essentially a spirit storm, and they can rip and tear your soul while it's alive in your body. And so it could even theoretically rip your soul out of your body, which would kill you, of course. And then your soul is now just trapped in this whirlwind, not able to kind of pass into the wheel necessarily, depending on what the bioic is like. But the one we're going to focus on today is soul twins, because I find the concept of soul twins really interesting, and I also think that, well, one, there's a really interesting quest from Pillars of Eternity 1 that is worth looking at, and 2, there's a kind of a mention of it within Avowed. There's a book that you can pick up behind somebody's house that talks about an investigation on soul twins, and I thought, well, that's really interesting, and I would like to actually dive into it a little bit more. And I think that there's also some really interesting like implications of the fact that soul twins exist and that this kind of thing can happen. And I'm interested in hearing from you, the listener, like what kind of implications could this draw? What kind of story hooks could you create? Especially since I'm into tabletop role playing, I think that the idea of soul twins could lead to a lot of interesting adventures. But let's move on to what a soul twin is. A soul twin is essentially when a soul is split between one or more individuals, which is to say that it's not just a little bit of the essence getting shaved off through normal erosion from the cycle of reincarnation, which is called the wheel, by the way. It's when a soul is actually fragmented, like right in half, or, like large enough portions of a soul split up that it can enter into two different bodies, and it is enough essence to constitute a whole soul, for lack of a better word, but it is technically two halves or two portions of one original soul. And so people who are born in different parts of the world, they might have another person in the world that is a soul twin, right? So like I might have a soul twin where like I have this soul inside of my body, and that's the essence that makes up my soul, but someone else in the world received the rest of that essence when it was broken in half, and that person is my soul twin. And this is really interesting because, like, if I start to awaken to my previous lives and that person starts to awaken to their previous lives, we're going to have a lot of the similar experiences and memories. And there's also going to be this, like, kind of like drawing towards each other. A lot of soul twins do end up finding each other, or they have this innate desire to find each other. Obviously, we haven't seen in Pillars of Eternity or Avowed an exhaustive, like, list or proof that this always happens, but Obsidian has kind of leaned in that direction whenever soul twins are involved, that there's this innate desire to find your other half of your soul and be near them, or at least understand them in some way, shape, or form. There are a number of people that you can meet in Pillars of Eternity, and probably even Avowed, that do have a soul twin. And I am going to talk about one of the quests that we get from Pillars of Eternity 1, particularly the White March DLC, that involves a person who has a soul twin. So a little heads up for this is that there are going to be a little bit of spoilers for a side quest called His Better Half in the White March DLC for the first Pillars of Eternity game. This is not a major spoiler. It doesn't spoil the entire narrative. It's just a side quest, but I am going to talk about this side quest. So if you want to avoid that, then feel free to jump off the episode. But it's been out for a long time, and I think this is also just a really interesting story to kind of show you like what soul twins can be like and the potential that there is narratively for this.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
So, as you are playing through the White March DLC, you'll enter into an area called Long Watch Falls, which is outside from Stalwart Village, the main area for the DLC. And there's this torn backpack that you can inspect, which will begin the quest His Better Half. And essentially, you're tasked with discovering what happened to this person whose name is Ygadr. I don't know how to pronounce it. I always want to say Gyadr. It's Ygadr. According to Adiran dialects, the letter Y is pronounced like E, and then it would be Gadr, which is just Gather, as far as I can tell. So Ygadr is, I suppose, how this name is pronounced. It sounds weird. It doesn't roll off the tongue the best, but whatever. So you're tasked with finding this Ygadr as part of this quest, and eventually you are able to locate this journal, which is logged as a quest item called Ygadr's Journal, and it kind of tells you a little bit about this person. In reading the journal, it reads, most of the few remaining pages are ruined with mud, but you can make out an entry near the end of this journal, and it says, Folkstag, woke up this morning and saw my toes had turned blue. Spent the last of my fuel warming them up, but it only took me an hour to start the campfire this time. How far I've come. I passed a village yesterday and thought about stopping. A warm bed and a proper meal would have been a treat after almost a week in these mountains, but I don't want to lose track of my soul twin, not when I'm so close. I dreamed of the cave behind the waterfall last night. I think that's where I'll find him. I'm not sure what else it could mean, but I'd better. The next page is missing and the rest are unreadable. So we have a few things we can talk about here lore-wise. First off, the word Volksdag is one of the fantasy names for a day of the week. I think Volksdag is Friday. There's only 5 days in the week in this world, at least according to the Adiran calendar, or would it be Adiran or either way? There's only 5 days of the week, and I'm pretty sure Volksdag is one of the last 2 days. And so this is just charting the day that this person is writing this particular journal entry, although we don't have the time of the year or anything like that based off of what we're looking at here. Talking about their waking up and their toes had turned blue, and this is because they're exploring a region of this world called the White March, which is named such because it's basically a bunch of snowy mountainous areas. And so this person is trudging through the snow and the cold of the White March, trying to, as they say later, track their soul twin. They passed through a village recently, and that's probably Stalwart Village, where they could have actually got lodging. But they can feel that their soul twin is nearby, and they don't want to lose track of them. It mentions here that they have been dreaming of a cave behind a waterfall, and that's where they think that the soul twin is. And this is really interesting because it brings up this idea that if you have a soul twin, that there can be some form of a live connection between you and that person. In a lot of other senses, like if you have an awakened soul, then you are looking into your past lives. You know, you're not like having a live conversation with another person in the past. You're just kind of experiencing things that have already happened. But when you have a soul twin, if there's some way to have a connection between the two of you, you could almost see each other's lives as it goes. Now, there's not a lot of documentation of this particular thing happening, but obviously there is a little bit of something that can go on there. So this person are having these dreams of this cave behind a waterfall, and that's what they're looking for. And as you continue on the quest, you do actually find the location that this person is referring to. When you find the ice cave, which is in Longwatch Falls, you enter into this large, cavernous, icy area, and you are confronted with an alpine dragon. Its red eyes clouded like dirty ice, and its sides heaved with labored breaths. Frosty plumes jet between its teeth. That's literally an in-game description of the alpine dragon. Dragons are really interesting in the world of Eora because they are, as they grow from worms into drakes, or is it drakes into worms? Either way, as they grow, their body starts to take on a physiology that matches the world around them. And so like an alpine dragon will be kind of rocky and icy and snowy in its physiology. As well, it might be growing like large tufts of fur or hair. This particular alpine dragon doesn't have any fur or anything. Like, it looks fairly reptilian, I would say. But the color palette of this dragon is definitely frozen ground. It looks like frozen ground. It's kind of a really light tan mixed with the icy blue hue to it. And in talking with this alpine dragon, you learn that this alpine dragon is in fact the soul twin of this person, Igadar. And so Igadar was looking for their soul twin, and it happens to be inside this alpine dragon, which is, that's crazy. Imagine your soul twin was an alpine dragon. I guess you can't imagine that because it's such an alien idea because it's in a fantasy world, but still, that's one crazy thing to learn. However, the story gets a little more interesting from here. So if you haven't already turned off because of spoilers, then, now is definitely a good time to do so. But as you talk with the alpine dragon, because they do have a level of sentience that you can do that, you learn that this alpine dragon has been sort of tortured from the idea that it has a soul, a portion of a soul. It doesn't have a full soul. I don't know if the dragon is necessarily aware to the same extent as an animancer is of what a soul twin is. However, it's very clearly not enjoying its experience of not having a full soul, but it realized that it had this ability to absorb the souls of others, which led to a fairly awful and violent thing that this dragon had done when it realized that its hatchlings, which are its progeny, that they could kill their hatchlings, their offspring, and absorb the essence of their souls into their own, and thus making them feel a little bit more whole rather than half of a whole. And this dragon did that kind of out of like desperation, kind of like just like desperately wanting to feel whole again. But this dragon has kind of become very concerned with its own behavior. It hated that it did that thing, but yet at the same time it feels driven to do this. If you are able to parlay with the dragon for it to not eat you, because it obviously wants to try to eat your soul as well as the souls of others, you learn that when it gives you these items called Riona's Vambraces, there's a little story that you can read in the item description that talks about this explorer Riona who managed to convince this alpine dragon to not eat her and take her soul in exchange that she would find a bigger meal for him. And so this alpine dragon followed Riona to basically a camp where another set of explorers were, and so he got a bigger meal out of it. And while the dragon was consuming the essence of this other exploratory group, Riona ran away and lost her vambraces in the snow. And it seems that the dragon itself has collected that, and it gives it to you as part of this quest, depending on the outcome of your choices. And it seems that this quest kind of concludes, at least on Igader's side, as finding this alpine dragon and then unfortunately becoming one of the many victims of this dragon, consuming people and their essence to kind of make their soul whole again. And it turns out that Igader is not just the one half soul of this particular dragon. Igader is one of many. So there are many other soul twins out there that have portions of this soul that the alpine dragon longs to be whole from again. And so this is I think it's a really interesting idea. And the reason that I kind of got turned on to this idea in the first place to talk about it in the shorter version of today's episode is because behind one building, I believe it's called the Hengen's Cabin, in the Dawnshore region, there is this book that you can find. And this happens all throughout the game of Avowed, where you can go and you can find books just laying about in people's homes or in dungeons, etc., and you can read the lore in these books, which of course I do because I'm a huge nerd. The book in question is called On Soul Twins, a Treatise. If you pick it up, you are treated to one little excerpt from this entire book, and it reads, "There are believed to be a number of phenomena that a soul can undergo during the cycle of reincarnation. Whether a minuscule fraction of a soul's essence is ground away by the forces of entropy, or the majority of it is lost to the beyond. No soul survives a journey around the wheel without at least some sort of fragmentation. In some exceptional cases, a soul can fracture cleanly into two even halves, each of which then inhabits a different creature upon the soul's return to Eora. Though rare, this occurrence has been well documented by scholars through the ages, especially since the founding of the Brackenbury Sanitarium in 2729 AI. In this treatise, I will compile what information I can on the soul twin phenomenon, as well as dispel some of the many myths and misconceptions regarding what it truly means to be a soul twin. The lengthy document that follows is agonizingly dull and difficult to parse." All right, so that's something you can pick up in the game of Avowed and read to understand the lore of this world. And I really like that because it's presented to us, the player character, as a treatise that an academic would write, in introducing their essay or their topic or their dissertation, whatever it is, right? It's presented in this diegetic way of it's something that's in this world. It's not just a piece of lore that a developer wrote for the sake of writing it. It's almost like it's written by someone within this world. And I think that this one particular document does a really great job of showing what the cycle of reincarnation is like and how it has implications for a person's soul. It introduces the idea of the cycle of reincarnation within the first sentence, and then it introduces the idea of entropy and souls fragmenting piece by piece every time it goes about the wheel, and it draws this implication of different things that can happen, including soul twinning. And so I just want to really give Obsidian great credit, and whoever wrote this, really great credit, because it introduces a number of really deep topics about this world in such a concise way. And when I read this, I was so impressed by it, because I'm replaying the game for a second time, and so I read this again, and I was like, I want to talk about that on the next episode. And so that's why I'm talking about it here in this first portion of the episode before I talk about my final impressions of the game, because I really love this world, and I think this was a really interesting part, and I think that you will find it interesting as well. All right, before we jump into the gameplay section, I just want to give a little interjection here. I recently updated Audacity to whatever its newest form is, and it is a broken update. The audio software ruined a lot of the audio I had, and so I kind of had to take it apart piece by piece, re-record a couple of things, and so what we're basically going to jump into now is me talking about my gameplay experiences. So at this point in time, if you are wanting to not experience any spoilers for the game, I suggest jumping off right now. That is the first and foremost thing that I really want to communicate to you, is that there are spoilers ahead. I talk about pretty much every narrative part of the game that I want to talk about and all that. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Spoilers up ahead. I'm still going to include another interlude after this little segment here just to make sure. But yeah, that's what's going to happen right away. So the part we're going to jump into, I basically comes at the tail end of me talking about all the different weapons that I had tried out, which in listening back to it was kind of boring. And it was also the most problematic to fix on Audacity. So I just decided to cut it out altogether. If you want to experience the weapons in Avowed, you can go experience yourself by playing them or watching a video. You don't need to listen to me talk about it. So yeah, it comes in right at the tail end of me discussing all the different weapons and what I was using them for, and then kind of jumps in from there about my gameplay experiences. So thanks everyone for your patience on this little interjection, and I hope you like, what is said about the game. All right, let's go. So the combat for all of these different weapons are really great. Like, I played around with pretty much all of them at some point in time when I was exploring the Dawnshore region, and I had a hard time picking which ones I wanted to do because they were all so snappy and responsive and felt like they had impact. When I hit people with a mace in the head and their body went flying and ragdolling because of the physics engine, I was like, damn, that felt good. But then when I sniped someone from far away with an arquebus, I really felt like powerful in what the things I could do. I did ultimately fall on the arquebus as my main weapon, with a grimoire and an axe as my alternative build, at least for the first portion of the game, before I just kind of went dual pistols for the other portion. So I really, really laid into the guns for most of my combative playthrough, and it was very, very satisfying. I went basically through the entire game, 60 hours, where I was mostly just doing pistols and arquebus. That was my main thing, and it never got samey. I was always worried that the combat would feel samey, but I got to the end of the game still enjoying my use of these weapons. Now, I have mentioned on previous episodes as well as on Avowedcast, I feel a little pigeonholed by the upgrade system in this game. Usually crafting and upgrading is something that's kind of optional. You don't need to engage with it to really get the maximum out of a game. I hate to compare Avowed to Skyrim because it is not these are two different games. However, the mechanic in Skyrim, I think, shows something that I really appreciated from the combat, which is that you don't have to engage with the blacksmithing in Skyrim to get really good weapons, to feel powerful in the game. Whereas in Avowed, unless you're playing on easier difficulties, it becomes pretty apparent that if you want to feel powerful in battle, you need to upgrade your equipment. You need to find equipment that's either a higher tier than you're already at, or you need to invest the resources and materials that you gather into the weapons you have in order to keep them at a level where they're actually viable in battle. And I don't necessarily hate that idea at the outset, because it's just like, okay, fine, you have to upgrade your weapons. It's not a big deal. However, the further you get into the game, the more pigeonholed you kind of feel to stick with what you've already built. Obsidian has included a respec option for you to completely remake your character. You can refund all of your ability points and respec them however you want, and you can break down upgrades and items to get those upgrade items back and then invest all of those upgrade materials into other weapons if you really feel like that's what you want to do. However, there is a level of time consumption with that I think demotivates a player from actually doing that. There was one instance when I got to Galawain's Tusks where I said, screw it, I'm going to do this. I respec'd my character entirely to focus way more on one-handed melee and some wand stuff, because I wanted to play around with something other than guns, because that's all I'd been doing. And then I respect the character and their ability points, and then I broke down the items that I was using and invested all this other stuff that I had broken down. I broke down other resource materials and then rebuilt them back up, and I picked these other weapons and got them back up to level. And the entire process took me a fair amount of time, and then I went into some combat to test it out. and I really wasn't sure if I was enjoying it or not. And so, not wanting to lose these other items that I had permanently upgraded, or sorry, deleted, I decided to just reload my save and stick with my guns. Now, so certainly there is an option to switch, but the option to do so is a little bit cumbersome. And because there is that uncertainty, I don't feel like I really want to switch. So I was stuck playing with the guns, which, again, I did enjoy. Obsidian have crafted a wonderful combat system, but I wish they had made the ability to respec the character a little bit more fluid. So do make sure that when you're playing in Dawnshore that you're really taking the time to thoroughly explore all the weapons. I think I spent way too much time goofing around with the arquebus and the pistols and the axes, that I didn't give wands or daggers or spears or anything else a try, that I knew that I was making a full decision. But the combat was always fun. I found, especially now that I'm in my second playthrough of Path of the Damned, which is the hardest difficulty, I'm really having to think ahead about how am I going to approach this. I have to pay attention to the environment to see if, can I light this thing on fire and that will hurt the people around it? Can I electrocute the water that these people are standing in? Like, I have to really pay attention and think ahead of time. Whereas when I was playing on easy mode in my first playthrough, I could kind of just run in and shoot people mindlessly and just have a giddy old time. So whatever kind of combat you want, Obsidian has really made it available to you in any way. The second thing to kind of mention here is the exploration. And this is where I really want to give like the shining award to the area designers of this game. Like, honestly, if Avowed, and I mean this, if Avowed was ever to get an award at the Game Awards or whatever Game Awards show that you watch, in my opinion, one of the areas where Avowed absolutely shines is the level design, the quest design, and the area design. It is fantastic. There are these regions and these areas within these regions and dungeons within these areas within these regions that like wind in upon themselves, and you have this feeling of getting lost, but somehow you still know where you are all the time, and all the roads lead to a place where you need to be. You're not missing out on a lot of stuff. You can always quickly kind of backtrack to see anything that maybe you missed. And I was very able to explore fully the regions I was in without actually being lost. It always felt like I was turning the corner and finding some hidden secret, and I was always able to like climb on top of things and jump on rooftops and from cliff tops and go from place to place, feeling like I was breaking into areas of the map I wasn't supposed to be in, and just to find that there was a little bit of loot hidden over there. So that, the designers of the area have really taken some time to make sure that the player feels that way, and I love it. I love the exploration of this world. I really thoroughly enjoyed exploring every region of the game of Avowed. And so if any area designers are listening to this, like, just bravo, amazing work. And so yeah, exploration is very good in this game, and exploration is also rewarding. I know when I played The Outer Worlds, which is, a game by Obsidian, that was one of the things that I felt was a little lackluster. Like, I would go and explore underneath all the staircases, for example, in The Outer Worlds and find nothing. I would go off into this corner of the map where there might have been something cool to look at, but like there was largely nothing for me to do or interact with, and so I felt like there was a lot of empty spaces in The Outer Worlds. But in Avowed, if you take the time to turn the next corner and just see what's around there, you'll see something. Whether it's a chest with items in it, whether it's a really, really great view that like Obsidian is taking the time to show off, or an NPC, or a bit of environmental storytelling, like there's always something around every corner. And I love that Obsidian has done that. The world is very dense with things to find and experience and look at, but it doesn't feel overly dense. Like if you're standing in any one spot, you would look in a direction and it all looks like there's nothing nearby. But if you walk for 30 seconds in any direction, you'll find something novel and new to look at or do or engage with. And I think that it's like top tier work that they've done in terms of exploration and giving a novel experience. The next main portion to talk about would be the narrative. And I'm going to do the non-spoiler part of this first, and then I'll dive into spoilers later. I really liked the story of Avowed. As someone who has been seeped in Pillars of Eternity's lore for years now, I was very invested into the world. I tried to play Avowed with the mindset of like, what if I was a new player? And I did wonder a number of times if new players would understand the gravity of some of the things brought up in the game of Avowed, like the fact that you are a godlike and a lot of them are disappearing. The game does point it out to you, and it does take the point to say like, oh, this is important that a lot of godlikes are vanishing, but I don't think it really impresses upon new players just how big of a thing that is, or the fact that your godlike character doesn't know who their patron deity is. That's really odd. Like that really stands out in this world. And I don't know that a new player would necessarily have that weightiness of that knowledge on themselves if they hadn't played Pillars of Eternity beforehand. I am happy to report, just as Obsidian says, you do not need to play Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2 to really understand the story of Avowed or the world of Eora in a way that you are hooked in. And I know a lot of people who played Avowed had never played Pillars of Eternity who really, really, really enjoyed it. But I have also talked to a number of individuals who are like, this game keeps bringing up this idea about me and my god, and I don't know who they are, and I don't really feel like I care about that necessarily, right? Like, I get that it's a big deal, but they didn't understand why, right? And like, you know, when you have millions of players like Avowed does, there's always going to be a lot of people who just, you know, aren't as bought in by certain things, right? And so that's not necessarily a black mark against Obsidian for not making a good story. It's just an observation in the sense of like there is, I think, some of the nuance in this story that is lost on new players. But I do think Obsidian has done absolutely everything right in terms of onboarding new players who want to learn about that stuff. I do think it would behoove Obsidian to have like a lore index. Like if there is anything that we can have in conversation that we would press the button to look up, we should be able to look that up in the menu as well. There is a lot of lore you can look up in the menu, but you can't look up every individual word, which is already clearly in the background of this game's coding in an encyclopedic form, right? So I feel like giving the gamers access to that information just in the menu would be a good idea. Maybe that option's there and I just didn't see it. To be honest, I didn't go looking for it a ton because I know this world pretty far inside and out. But as far as the narrative itself goes, I really was bought into this world, into what was going on. I did kind of predict a lot of things before they were going to happen. Like the big reveal at the end, which I'm not going to talk about right now, was kind of something that I thought was already established as true earlier in the game. And I don't know if that's because I just kind of saw it coming from my knowledge of this world, or if it was just really, really well foreshadowed in side quests and that's why I knew it, or if perhaps it's just something that, new players wouldn't necessarily recognize the ending ahead of time. I don't know what the situation is, because I do know a number of people who did not see the ending coming at all. So it's interesting to kind of get that array of experiences. And there have been a lot of experiences. There's a number of people have not liked this game for the same reasons that a lot of people have very much liked this game. And so Avowed definitely seems to be a you enjoy it or you don't enjoy it kind of thing, which is true of all creative content or works of art. It depends on the person who is engaging with the art, whether or not they're the kind of person who's going to like it. But you can definitely see Obsidian making a lot of choices with Avowed that other game developers might not necessarily take, and they did it for very specific reasons. I'm not privy to the information of what all the reasons might be, but I can kind of like guess or speculate. For example, there are a lot of instances in this world where there's a level of non-reactivity from the world environment around you compared to your character. Like, I brought this up on a Avowedcast. I think Remoran brought it up. There are these fantasy cows, for lack of a better word, that are walking around, and you can't really interact with them, right? Like if you try to hit them with your sword, not condoning animal violence, but if you try to hit one of these fantasy cows with your sword, the sword just kind of goes right through them and they don't react to your presence at all. I think that is a purposeful decision on Obsidian's part, not because they're lazy and not because, we don't care about that stuff, but because it's like, there are other things that are more important to focus on in Avowed. Like they want to put the effort into the systems of the game that they want to have shine. They're not necessarily trying to make an immersive sim. Avowed is not an immersive sim. But I think a lot of RPG players are kind of accustomed at this point to having a level of the immersive sim genre in RPGs. And Avowed, I think decidedly, for the better, in my opinion, doesn't have a lot of those elements in it. And so while a lot of gamers, myself included to a certain degree, would like to see some of that reactivity, it's just not there. When you pick up items in a person's home, it's not considered stealing. In an immersive sim, that would be ridiculous. But in a game where you don't want to include those particular systems, it's not ridiculous. It's just part of the game. It's just you looting, right? Like the player looting in an RPG is a very normal mechanic. And they don't have to include a crime mechanic. They're just rewarding you, the player, for being thorough. You walk into a person's house, you want them to write a full journal for every single NPC, even the unnamed ones? It's like, no, they'll put some spoiled cabbage in there for you to pick up that you can use to cook food with or something down the road. And that way you're getting rewarded for exploration and it's not being overly cumbersome on the developers. And I feel like that decision actually has merit and holds ground, because it means no matter how much you explore, there's always something for you to get as a result. And I really value that, especially since everything you can pick up in this game, even the food, almost especially the food, has a good use in the game of Avowed. I found that there wasn't anything that I picked up that I couldn't have or would not have used for something that I valued in this game's experience. Now, that being said, I love this game's exploration. I love the game's story and narrative. I love the game's characters. I do think that perhaps the companions, they could be a little bit quippy at times, but I like that personally. But I definitely know people who weren't necessarily engaging with it on the same level as me. So this game has a lot of positive traits. I really do like the characters, actually. In fact, even the ones I don't like, I think speaks positively. Marius, at first, I hated Marius, the companion. He was grinding on me. He was always criticizing everything I did. And I was like, listen, I don't need that in my life. I'm not going to have you hanging out with me. But then when I got to a region of the game where his story was really impactful, I decided to have him tag along. And I found that I actually really warmed up to his character as I got to understand him a little bit more. And then conversely, there was one character I was really interested in hanging out with, which was Yatsley. But then I kept making these decisions that was at odds with her own opinions, even though she wasn't putting them in my face. I found that I didn't want her around as much, and I started to like her less and less. And I don't mean that in the sense of Obsidian made two bad characters, or that the voice acting was bad. Quite the opposite. It's that the characters are written with such depth that I, a living, breathing person, actually found myself liking more or disliking more these characters as I got to know them better. And I think that actually speaks to the quality of the writing. I think the writing for the companions is very good. There's always going to be little nitpicks I can do about, well, I don't like this piece here or that piece there, but you know what? That's just a little idiosyncrasy that I don't like compared to other players who will like it. And so the characters are written very well, and the NPCs are also very well written. There's a number of characters I love talking to. There's a person named Tej, who you can run into in the city of Paradis, who is essentially my favorite person as a lore nerd to talk about, because he talks about a bunch of the world lore that's in this world. He's a bit of an ass, but he's my kind of ass. That sounded weird, but you know what I mean. Anyways, the story itself, I think, had a really good flow to it. It's hard for me to talk about the story of this game because, I am so bought into the world beforehand, and because I'm not sure necessarily how I feel about the story in some way, and I don't know how to talk about it without getting into spoilers. I think a lot of it is well written. I don't think there's anything that's super hokey or dumb cliche fantasy in a non-qualitative way. I think that they really leaned into the lore of this world, and it asks some really interesting questions if you know the lore about this world, especially. If you really sit back and think about, what if situation XYZ were to happen in the world of Eora, what might occur? It's well, you might get a situation like you see within the game of Avowed, for example. And so there's a lot of really good, interesting lore-based questions. The world building is really good. There is a bit of a disconnect, I think, between the story of the Living Lands and the world at large. There wasn't a massive set of side quests that have to do with the Berevian church, for example, and I got to learn a lot about the god Bareth, and I got to learn a lot about the followers of Bareth and what makes them different from just regular people trying to live their normal life. I didn't get that. And there's 11 gods that Obsidian could have done that with. We got little bits and pieces here, but nothing that was super deep that we saw in Pillars of Eternity. But Pillars of Eternity is a completely different genre, right? So I can't have that same expectation that it's going to do those same things. I was personally a little let down by that, but being the lore nerd for Pillars of Eternity, that's a me thing for sure. As far as how they presented the world, I think they did a good job. I do wish that the Living Lands and Avowed felt like it was part of a larger whole of the world, but the Living Lands, when you think about it as a setting from a conceptual standpoint, it's a wild frontier that is fairly disconnected from the rest of the world because it's so far away and it is so far dangerous and people have not explored it. So this idea that you are away from the rest of the world, it almost thematically makes sense. So even though I kind of wanted to feel part of a larger world in the Living Lands in Avowed, I kind of get why perhaps there is a level of disconnect. Thankfully, there's a lot of lore books that you can pick up, and I heavily encourage you to read those books if you do want to feel like you want to understand the world more, because they have left a lot of books for you to read. And so I don't know why I can't say that Avowed is my new favorite game, because if you ask me, well, in this area, did they do a good job? I'd be like, yeah, they did great. Well, what about this area? Did they do a good job there? I'd be like, yeah, it was masterful. And the game, Obsidian have executed each part of the game very, very well, like master quality. Like use this as an example in classrooms to help other developers learn how to do this kind of thing, right? So like Obsidian has done everything right. So why am I not giving it my massive 10 out of 10 or something like that, you know? And I don't know why. Perhaps it's because there is a level of non-reactivity to the world that I just can't let go of. Perhaps it is because there's some questions I have lore-wise that I can't get answers to, but these are all subjective, just me things. And so at times I do wonder if it's because Avowed isn't necessarily breaking new ground at any point in time, right? Like, it's a very good, unique, and original story, yes, set in an original fantasy world that they have created and that you can literally, like I have done, spend years talking about. But as far as like the gameplay mechanics and things like that go, it is not doing something necessarily new, and I don't know why that should matter, but maybe it does. But that being said, like, I'm kind of having a little bit of a dour note right now, and it makes it, oh man, Gingerino thinks this game's only a 6 out of 10. It's like, no, if I was to put a number on it, I'm going to be like 8 or 9 out of 10. Like, this game is phenomenal, and people ought to play it, and people ought to dive into it more. I think I want more of it is almost the problem, is a weird way to put it, is that I want more of Avowed, not just in the sense of I want DLC or I want an Avowed 2, but I want more of Avowed in the sense of like, I want more in this game. Like, I want to be able to interact with the world in some way, shape, or form where it feels like I'm an active participant in this setting itself, not just in choice and consequence. Actually, like, that would be a 10 out of 10. Like, the choice and consequence in this game, there are choices you make in this game you don't realize are important, but it is going to be important. And I've made choices that I look back on this game and I'm like, I can't believe that's what I chose. So definitely Obsidian knocked it out of the park in that regard. But like in the little things, like, you know, I hate to bring up the fantasy cows, but the fact that they don't acknowledge my presence or that I can't interact with them in some way, it makes me not feel like a presence within this world, but more of an observer of the small parts of this world, if that makes sense. I don't know if I necessarily know what I'm getting at. I'm hoping that maybe people out there will understand what I'm getting at, and you could tell me what I think. That being said, let's dive into the spoiler section of today's episode. Mostly just going to be talking about the narrative and the end of the game and what I think about that. So if you want to jump off now to avoid anything talking about how the game progresses, this is definitely the point to jump off. So as the game of Avowed progressed, I found that I was still enjoying it pretty much as I did when I started the game. The combat did not feel samey, even though I was doing the same thing pretty much all the way up to the end. I did learn to goof around with the combats a little bit, and I changed up my weapon loadout a tiny bit, but I kind of kept it within the range of the abilities that I already chosen. But there was still a lot of wiggle room in there. I really enjoyed the new regions of the world as I got to Emerald Stair and Shatterscarp and Gallowayne's Tusks, and eventually the final region of the game called the Garden. I was a bit let down by the fact that there are new unique weapons you can get very late in game, and that you don't really get a lot of time or big chunk of the game to enjoy some of those weapons. Like, there is some that you can get literally in the last region of the game called the Garden. There's a few unique weapons that you can get in there that I think were really interesting, but I just, the amount of time I got to play with them was not enough to really enjoy it. And I think that makes a really good argument for a new game plus mode, even if it wasn't entirely balanced. I know Obsidian would have to, so I'm not expecting it, but I think that's a good argument for a new game plus mode of like, well, you got this new weapon, the Unmaker or whatever it is, and you want to goof around with it, but you only have the rest of this region and then the final section of the game to really enjoy it. But on top of that, you're also getting a new godlike ability that you want to goof around with. So it's like, I really feel like a new game plus mode where you get to really thoroughly enjoy the character you've built for the breadth of the entire game, I think is a good argument for that. So I do want Obsidian to do that on top of some of the quality of life improvements for like streamlining the respec options and things like that. I think it would behoove Obsidian to perhaps implement some of those in future updates. But we do know that there are plans for the game in the future. Like, Obsidian has stated they want to continue working on this game for a while, especially before something gets greenlit in terms of a sequel or DLC. But as far as the game itself goes, I've really enjoyed it. I wish I could see more of the nighttime, because this game does have a day and night cycle, but if you want to see the nighttime, you basically have to play without going to your party camp for a full hour before you start to see the nighttime. And if at any point in time you go back to your camp to like talk to your companions or whatnot, it automatically resets to morning of the next day or whatever. And like, so basically 90 or 85% of my playthrough was in the daytime hours in this game, which really I was sucked in a sense because, man, I really liked the nightscapes for this game. It wasn't a make or break, but it's just a little thing. But I also think that speaks positively to the game because, like, man, if you explore some of these games at nighttime, it's just gorgeous what Obsidian has done. I really like Shatterscarp. Shatterscarp for me, especially at nighttime, was one of the most... I, like, had feelings. Like, I was, I felt things while playing this game in the sense of, like, there was this, like, foreboding sense of danger because it was dark, but at the same time, there was this, like, coolness to it because you're in the desert at nighttime. And it was just really cool to see these little lights dotting the distance because depending on where you are, you could see pretty far. It was very cool to explore that area at night. Shatterscarp had to be one of my favorite zones in this entire game. I know a lot of people talk about Emerald Stair, especially at nighttime, being certainly pretty, but for me, Shatterscarp, just in terms of exploration, area design, and the enemies, because you really get to see a lot of the dream thralls by the time you're in Shatterscarp. I really, really thought that Shatterscarp was great. I could spend a lot of time there. And the settlement of Thirdborn, as well as some of the lore about Rauatai that you learned there, for me was particularly interesting. And on top of that, there's an archmage in that map called Ringrim. I thought it was going to be Kalikoth, and I was wrong. It turned out to be Ringrim, and I really thought that part was cool. So, yeah, as far as the game progressed, as I continued going on into spoiler territory, like, the combat was great. It stayed engaging the entire time, and it didn't get stupid complicated. Like, they didn't just show a new enemy that had bigger armor, right? Like, they didn't bullet sponge all of the enemies as they got harder. Like, they did make them more difficult, but the game kind of reacted by pointing out, upgrade your weapons and it'll go just as well as it has gone this far. And so I always kind of felt this push and pull of, I'm not powerful enough, and then I invest into my weapons and now I'm powerful enough. And so that kind of, I think that kind of purposeful design kept me engaged with the combat in a way where I was always thinking about what I had and how I could improve, and it made the new unique weapons I was picking up more interesting because they were now at the same quality of tier that I had, so I felt like, okay, maybe I could try out this new weapon in the same category of what I already have rather than just this regular gun that I'm running around with. So that was really fun. The world and the NPCs in terms of exploration and socialization got way more and more interesting and more complex as it went, and the moral choices got more and more difficult. I found myself really, really stuck with the Shatterscarp decision on whether or not to destroy the ruins that the Dream Thralls were coming out of, or excise the source of this plague, but at the cost of many people's lives. I really struggled with that decision. Like, what do I want to do? Especially because the decision I was leaning towards sided with a person in the game who I had come to despise at this point in time in the game. Because in the Emerald Stair region, I had decided not to antagonize the Steel Garrote, and as a result, they ended up basically destroying the city there, and I was, like, really upset by the fact that I let that happen. And so I kind of went anti-Steel Garrote really quickly. And a game has never done that to me in a narrative sense before, like Obsidian has. They got me invested into the character and into the world. So, like, congrats to Obsidian for doing that. As far as the story goes, the big reveal at the end, man, I'm really spoiling a lot of stuff in this particular section. So hopefully you signed off of this episode if you wanted to avoid it. But I gave you a heads up. The ending of this game, I liked the interaction with Sapadal. I liked the reveal of Sapadal as a new god. There was definitely a little bit of tension from me and many other players when it was revealed that Sapadal is the god of the living lands, and it's an unknown god up until now, and it's just been kind of trapped in this closed Audra system on the living lands. I liked the reveal that the living lands was a closed Audra system, because that's a question I've had about the lore before, of like, what happens if a chunk of the world is isolated from the rest of the Audra network of this world. And this basically is like an experiment. This game is like a thought experiment of what could happen, where a god like Sapadal is birthed into the world through organic means, or at least after the rest of the gods are already here, kind of thing. Like, we have this new god on the scene compared to the other gods which have existed for a long time in the past. And I thought that, that's a really interesting idea, like what happens in a closed Audra system where the souls can't go into the cycle of reincarnation across the entire globe. They're just stuck on this one island. It did kind of play a little bit against the lore that we see in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, because it was fairly established that like the 11 gods of the world that we see in Pillars of Eternity, those are the gods. There's nothing else. It's just those 11 gods. And that fact, I'm not going to spoil anything in Pillars of Eternity, but that fact is a really like important cornerstone of the narratives and story we see in Pillars of Eternity. And so for Avowed to kind of introduce this new topic of like, oh, you know what, these other gods that could be out there, they're allowed to do it, and it does make sense. I like it, personally speaking, but I could understand there were some people who felt a little betrayed by the lore in the sense of like, this was something that was established in the world as true, and now it turns out it's not true. It's not a retcon, but it feels like a retcon, and some people don't like that. Now my personal response is to be like, this is a world with a lot of mystery to it, and something like this can happen. Like, it makes sense in the lore. And so Obsidian isn't really doing any sense of a betrayal by doing this. But I can understand on an emotional level how some players would be like, I invested into this world and bought into this world the way it was presented in Pillars, and this feels like a different world, even though technically it's not. I'm on Obsidian's side with this personally. I liked the reveal. I was kind of personally hoping it was one of the 11 gods, just because it was fun to maybe learn a little bit more about those 11 rather than just another god now, because now I have another new god to learn about. But it definitely is a way better twist, especially when you start to really buy into this narrative of this god Sapidol as almost like this idea like an infant god. Like they are this new divine creature that exists, and they don't really understand their power. They don't understand the meanings of life. They don't understand the importance that these other creatures have within the world. And so like, I thought of them as a monster, and I was going to be like, I'm going to kill Sapidol if I have the chance, because she's an awful, horrible thing that should not exist, because look at all the awful things that they have done in the past. But then as I started to like have the narrative unfolded to me, I really realized, I'm like, this is literally a baby god. Like, this is an infant god. Like, how can you hold a toddler deity responsible for not understanding the world it's in, right? So then, but at the same time, it's like, man, that is a really huge force within the world, and it can have a lot of negative side effects on the world and the people that live in it. So like, maybe it's too dangerous to let live, but at the same time, how can you make that kind of a decision, morally speaking? Like I really wrestled with some of those topics and ideas, and so I genuinely liked that. I did find the ending of the game to be, I thought a lot of the stuff was established. I don't know how else to say it. Like the reveal at the end of the game is basically the Dream Scourge finds its origins in Sapidol, this god that is your god, that you're a godlike of. And so she is kind of responsible for the Dream Scourge, for lack of a better word. And my player character said this to Sapidol at the end of the game with a question mark, as if it hadn't been established. And I, as the player in real life, was like, I thought we already knew that. Like, I thought it was pretty well established at this point that was like, obviously that's where the Dream Scourge comes from, kind of a thing. It's just a result of her like slowly, essentially going insane. I mean, there's a little more to it than that, but like, it seemed really clear to me. And there were other reveals as well in the story that I just thought were very obviously true. And I don't think it was because I was necessarily a nerd of the lore of this world. I think it was probably because I was very thorough. I explored everywhere in this world. I read every single document. I did all the side quests. I talked with other people about the game. And so maybe just through that discourse and through the thought process and through the exploration, maybe I was able to put two and two together. I haven't done just a crit path run of the game. And I do know some people that didn't see the end coming. But I know a number of people, especially, that was like, it didn't seem like a big twist at the end. Like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. I really like the ending portion of the game, the Siege of Paradis. I think it was a really fun finale. I wish that because they did give you this new godlike power, which is incredibly powerful and fun to use. I wish that the Siege of Paradis had more of a, like, I don't know if anyone had ever played Destiny, the end of the Destiny saga, where like you went on this just like uber powerful power trip mission to lay waste to your enemies kind of thing. I wish there was a little bit more of that to it. Like, I definitely felt like I was at odds, like, at even stance with a lot of the enemies. So it felt more like a walking tour of all the NPCs I had met throughout my playthrough, which was certainly fun. And I really enjoyed talking to these characters who I had invested in but forgot about through my 60 hours of playthrough. But in terms of like mowing through enemies, I was kind of just like, every time I would see a group of the Steel Garrote, I'd be like, okay, let's deal with these guys so we can move on, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think if there had been a way to like beef up my abilities for that section, it would have made me feel really powerful. And then make the final battle with Ludwig way more difficult, and it would almost feel like it was a climactic battle where you felt really powerful, but then someone really actually challenged your power and you had to do something with it. So it didn't have the same impact for me, but I know a lot of people had the opposite effect. A lot of people had the discussion with Sapidol right before the end of the game, and it didn't feel impactful for them. And then they went and did the Siege of Paradis, and they really, really enjoyed it, whereas I had the reverse option. I think it's because I talked her to death essentially at the end of the game, the very end of the game. So I just basically talked to the big bad boss of the entire game and avoided the entire combat situation with her, which I like. I don't think Obsidian should get rid of that. I think that should be an option because I think it speaks to the force of the character that you can create and craft. But it was just kind of weird in the sense of like, this is the penultimate, like this is the final encounter in the game, and I'm talking with her and she is starting to freak out, and the voice acting of Ludwig was very well done. Like they made it dramatic, but then her character just kind of falls to the ground and dies, and then the game is over. And it just felt, I don't know, it just felt like there was something else was supposed to happen. And now I think about it, I'm like, I don't know what else would or could have happened, but that's what it was. And so then the credits or the end slides started happening. I was like, oh, that was it? Oh, okay, cool. And then it was over. So I don't know, maybe if I had had a battle with her, it would have felt differently. I know someone on Avowed cast, they fought her and they said that it was a really good engagement. But again, I don't think Obsidian should get rid of the talking them to death option because I think that would really do discredit to a character that you can build. Like I invested in my points and abilities to be able to do things like that. And I don't know what else could be done about that. Maybe that's just how it goes, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I like different things than other people. Who knows? But yeah. So those are my impressions of the game. I kind of just summarized a lot of what I experienced. I'm curious to know what kind of decisions you guys made and what your experiences were for the story and the writing, etc., etc. So send me an email, worldofaora@gmail.com. Let me know your reviews of the game, complete with spoilers. And who knows, maybe I'll talk about some of those on the show. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at World of Eora. And if you want to support this show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/World of Eora. And I just put that in there so people have the option of supporting the show. I don't expect anybody to do so. I will do the show for free for as long as I possibly can, but some people find value in supporting shows that they like, so that's why it's there. That's everything for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening to it. I know there's a little bit of lore and mostly just me talking about my experience of the game, which I would say is overall very positive. I'm already on my second and third playthrough. I'm doing them in parallel. And I even have an idea for a fourth and a fifth. I don't think I'm ever going to get to them. I want to play a monk character at one point, like just punchy kicky the entire time, but we'll see. So I want to see this game more, and it was very fun, and I'm looking forward to getting into it more. But I have other games on my roster that I want to get to, and there's other games coming down the pipeline that I'm looking forward to, like Atomfall. So I'm not going to play Avowed forever. But because I am doing this podcast, I'm definitely going to try to play through thoroughly a second time. But I'm going to be doing so at a more reasonable pace, as well on Path of the Damned as a Steel Garrote loyalist, which is going super difficult so far, but I'm getting through it. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to actually pick for next week's topic, but I'm thinking I'm going to start diving into a little bit more of the spoiler territory, or, mid-spoilers. I don't know if I'll go straight to the end, but maybe I'll do some of the mid-spoilers, or something that spoils a little bit of the Pillars games, but isn't spoiler for Avowed. Anyways, I'm kind of leaning towards the History of the Living Lands books that you can get in the Dawn Treader quest. Those ones have some spoilers for the Deadfire game, but I think it's really cool what kind of different ideas are introduced in those books, especially for players who don't fully know the world. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.